the agenda for today is purely about sharing essential knowledge about CMMC, because there are some gotchas in there. We'll go through those and we'll summarize those at the end. The agenda is purely to share this essential knowledge, some insight, and as you can probably tell, we like to have a bit of fun with this. So it's quite a dry topic. I think we would all agree on that. So let's have some fun with it. There is no sales pitch. That's not the way we roll. You are, of course, very welcome to reach out to myself or any of the panelists or anyone on this call for that matter. If you wanted to take the conversation further, that's up to you. This purely is about sharing what we know. So onto our panelists. Dasha Deckwerth is the president of Stealth Group. She's our CISO, board advisor, and she's a provisional assessor. And you'll see a theme here. Leighton Johnson, CTO and founder of ISFMT Inc., also a provisional assessor. Bryan Johnson, guys, you're not related, right? No? No relation. He's a cyber consultant at Cential, also a provisional assessor. David Fairburn, president of Cyber Pros LLC, cyber program architect, author, provisional assessor. And Jeff here, Jeff Dalton, who's kind of snuck in. I believe, I'm not quite sure what your title is, Jeff, you might want to share, but I know you're something senior within CMMC, so if you wouldn't mind just sharing that.
I order the lunches and clean the bathrooms mostly.
Mr. Modesty in the show.
I literally came to hear you guys talk. I don't have any agenda whatsoever, but I am chair of the credentialing committee and one of the instructors. So.
Well, we're honored to and grateful to have you here. So thank you for that. For anyone,
it's nice to hear those words after reading LinkedIn all day.
I thought you would have learned by now.
Yeah, right. I should just delete my my user ID.
Yeah, we don't have any fun. We don't do that.
Off the Reddit as well. That's
right.
This is going to be one of those herding cats webinars, I can tell.
And turn on your SolarWinds server. So
yeah.
The questions are at slido.com. Not all of them, because we have various means of receiving questions. But if you have any questions as we go, either use the chat function or go to slido.com. The number, what do they call it? The number that you need to get this particular webinar is 82625. And Gerald, if you wouldn't mind putting that number in the chat so folks can see that as we go. So, as I've mentioned, this is so much better when it's interactive. So jammies or not, cameras on, if you wouldn't mind. We're not insisting on it. It just makes for a really nice experience for the panelists to see who's speaking and to have a chat. Mute, please, if you wouldn't mind, because we've all got some degree of background noise. I've got dogs and leaf blowers going around here, so I'll be on mute when I've stopped speaking. And other than that, let's make a start. So any questions at this particular point? Yes, just wave if you want to ask a question. If not, then we'll make a start. So CMMC, what's that all about? What does it stand for? So Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification. So what's it about? It's about DoD contractors and data, pretty much different types of data having to be secured in certain ways. That is what we would call in the UK the noddy view of CMMC. I'd like to invite our panelists, perhaps Jeff, as you're so senior in that organisation. Perhaps what's the elevator pitch sentence for CMMC? Why should we be bothered?
CMMC is a cyber performance maturity model to help us all get focused around the right things and increase performance over time by going through the maturity levels.
Right. So
and the end game is to protect our cyber assets.
Of course, yeah. But the important thing is that it's not a test to pass, right? It's a model for us to use as a baseline.
Right.
The object isn't to pass the assessment. The object is to improve the performance of your cyber posture, right?
And
So
keep improving it and make sure it doesn't dip below that level for sure. Yeah.
I mean, the assessment's just a way of like rallying around an agreed upon point is all it really is about. And the more people talk about passing it, the worse it gets. So,
right. I think the key for me, we're going to talk about defiles and get into some detail, but this this isn't a self-assessment. And I think that's, I'd like to get that point out there now. We will cover off the major points at the end, but it's not a self-assessment. It's not something you can kind of guess at and then all of a sudden you're working on DoD contracts. It's a lot more serious than that. It has teeth, basically. You know, my elevator pitch would be it's kind of DFARS with teeth or NIST with teeth. So
I think the big thing we got to keep in mind is this is about supply chain risk, and this is about contractors who are providing the support to DoD. And so it's incumbent upon all organizations that supply something to DoD to manage their information appropriately. And so that's where we get the idea around, you know, getting evaluated or looking at it or those types of things, because historically we have had huge problems around contractors managing their information in their locations, not in a DoD location, but in their location over the last 5, 6, 8 years. And that's really what ultimately DoD is striving for, is a way to manage that.
Sure. I mean, the size of the risk, according to CMMC, I think I saw 300,000 contractors in scope. And this is a sliding exercise. It will go 4 or 5 years, but that's the size of the problem: 300,000 DoD contractors. So okay, so we kind of mentioned DFARS and NIST a little bit. So Dasha, if you could take us perhaps into another layer of detail, you know, how is all of that connected? How did this evolve? Just link CMMC to DFARS and NIST, if you wouldn't mind.
Okay, so DFARS is really the Defense Federal Acquisition Regulation Supplement, which pretty much governs how to do business with the DoD. And in there, it states particularly that a contractor shall implement NIST 800-171. So CMMC is built on DFARS and the fact that DI requirements of NIST 800-171. So CMMC built on NIST 800-171, so you have to meet those requirements. But on top of that, there's a delta that was put in place by CMMC, which are 20 additional areas that NIST does not have, and also the maturity model. So basically, you have to meet the DFARS contractual requirements, you have to meet NIST, you have to meet the maturity level, and then you also have the 20 deltas that are outside of NIST that were added to CMMC. So it's a combination of different things: legal, technical, and of course maturity model. So that's in a nutshell.
For sure, great, thank you for that. And I know we're going to cover that in a little more detail, but let's just pivot to the data for a second, because you know you hear FCI and CUI and CTI and lots of data related acronyms. What do we need to know as a group about types of data and their relevance to different levels of CMMC?
Well, we got a couple of different areas that we have to focus on. First is the federal contract information that DoD provides to each contractor when they sign the contract. That's the first step. That's the DFARS areas of coverage, is typically in those areas. That's the information that the company gets from DoD about their standard contract efforts. It's not public. That's what that is covered. And you have to have a certain set of management criteria, 17 at level 1, total of 20 when we get to level 3, of those mechanisms around the contract information. Then we have controlled unclassified information, which are the particulars about the contract, what the organization is going to do, what are they providing, what's DoD expecting back from them, all sorts of different levels of that type of controlled information that's not in the national security realm. So therefore it's unclassified, but it is controlled because they don't want it to be released to everybody in the world as to what's going on, who's building what size, what type, those types of things. There are 14 or 15 different types of that information. The federal organization that oversees that is the National Archives and Records Administration, NARA, and they have produced for the last 4 or 5 years a set of criteria around how that's to be managed. DoD has adopted it, adjusted it to handle the specifics that DoD has as part of those processes. Parts of that includes technical information, it'll include defense information, that type of thing, not national security related, but nonetheless important for the suppliers to use to be able to produce what DoD wants under their particular contracts. There
Gotcha.
is a
So from
place at NARA that's called the CUI registry that lists all those things for us to be able to understand in generic terms, not specific to the contract, but in generic terms. And so then this whole process is designed around how the contractors manage that type of information.
Right. So is it fair to say, just a rule of thumb, that FCI is pretty much in scope for levels 1 and 2, and then CUI is the focus for 3, 4, and 5? Is that, just as a rule of thumb, is that fair?
I wouldn't say FCI is throughout all of it. So yeah, we start with the FCI information true at level 1. It increases the components around how we manage the cybersecurity of it at level 2 as we transition to CUI. And so level 2 is basically a transition step between FCI and CUI. And then we get full on level 3 for the standard CUI components, all of them. And 4 and 5 takes an extra focal point in certain areas around certain cybersecurity perspectives and ideas, threats and those types of things at level 4 and 5.
Okay, thank you for that. That's clarified something for me. I didn't know that. So thank you for that.
Along with that, I would say too that there's kind of been some debates as far as with CMMC and the data that it generates as we're doing assessments as to whether or not that information that is generated through the CMMC process, it too becomes CUI. I've seen a lot of communication and stuff going back and forth saying, you know, like an SSP, that's CUI. I know that's not generated from the government, so it's not a CUI. So I don't know if maybe the definitions from NARA might change with CMMC. Right. And just another comment too, you made a comment earlier that that these are basically a self-assessment, but it has teeth to it. And I think CMMC has a lot of traction. I'm starting to see through other agencies and also on the private side, because it's accountability. That's the teeth you're talking about. This is the first time that a framework has been put out there, a cybersecurity one, that has accountability tied to it. Yeah. So yeah. It's going to be interesting on CUI what the definition of that changes, but then it's going to be more on to what kind of teeth, I guess you might say, accountability that goes with that managing it.
Great point, Brian. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. So while we're on the subject of the data then, PII, what's the relationship between PII and CUI? Who'd like to answer that question?
Well, quickly, I can tell you that PII is one of the categories that NARA lists as CUI, okay, first and foremost. And so since we're talking about contractual information and contractual obligation information being delivered, there's not a lot of PII because the information is about what's being supplied, you know, in support of contracts. Is it there? Sure. Absolutely. You know, who's doing it at what level and what point, and potentially that type of information. And so PII is there as part of those efforts, but you know, it's not a major focus because we're talking about contractual information, performance, delivery, building widgets, whatever it might be here. So there's not a lot of focus on customer information there because the customer is DoD or a DoD agency. Yeah. You know,
and I guess that information is publicly available, you know, it's not so private, is it? So, okay, good answer.
It's
Thank
not
you for that.
personal. We'll put it that way
Right,
for the
yeah,
most part.
not
Is it
personal.
in there? Yes.
Yeah.
Is it in our category for CUI? Yes. Okay. But
This-
in support of what we're doing here, it's still, you know, not a super focus. It's not the primary focus. We'll put it that way. That's part of this process.
Okay.
Hey, Robert, this is Vince. Could I pile on to that?
Sure.
So for me, and this is one of the things, Leighton, I you know, all the non-practitioners that may be on here, I think the key to this is whether or not it's government information. If you have collect PII for your company, that's not CUI because it is not federal information. If you have PII that you collect on behalf of the federal government, so let's say, you know, you're on contract to run a course and you're collecting social security numbers as a part of that, or personally identifying information otherwise defined as a part of that, then that's federal information because you're collecting it on behalf of the federal government. If you're not collecting it on behalf of the federal government, or it wasn't given to you as federal government information, it doesn't meet the criteria for CUI.
Okay, it's not. It's good. Vincent, was that your question in Slido? Was that your comment?
You hit the debate right on the head.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
All right, great. Great. Okay. I think any more questions on data or any more points from the panel that we need to make very clear about the data?
Yeah, I think one of the major benefits of the CMC model is that regardless of whether it's PII or CUI data that is officially classified as such, the protection mechanisms are in place throughout this entire model to make sure that we address those appropriately, regardless of whether NARA or anyone else for that matter decides to change a definition of what is categorized as CUI or PII. As we all know, PII has undergone a number of definition changes over the years. And this particular model, unlike the others, really takes all of this into account so we're able to focus on the data and implement the correct security controls.
Gotcha. Great point. Thanks, Dave. Thank you. Okay, I think we've done the data to death. It's just keeping track on time. We've got a lot to cover. So, okay, we've mentioned levels. There are 5 levels. We know that. Who would like to get into a little detail around the levels and the differences between them, and even to the extent maybe of you know, how many of the NIST 800.171 activities apply per levels? I have a table I could flash up, but I don't want to do that. Let's talk to it for now. So who would like to go through the levels?
I'll take that. I'll take that.
Okay.
So essentially, again, there's 5 levels. And the key thing to remember is that they are cumulative. You cannot get to level 5 without doing 1 through 4. So to kind of reaching back to Leighton's point about, you know, FCI is a level 1. Well, ultimately, you know, they had to address for that at level 1. So it kind of snowballs all the way, or waterfalls, if the case may be. I don't want to use the term snow because of, you know. So, you know, it waterfalls.
It's a key point. It's a key point, ladies and gentlemen. This is a cumulative exercise. Yeah.
Right. So one is, you know, it's a basic cyber hygiene. Essentially, as an assessment, and I will always use the term assessment, not audit. So as an assessment, you're going in to make sure that the practices that are, and there's 17 of them, that have to be in place are truly there. Do the people that are implement them and have to manage those practices, do they understand it? Do they put that information out to their staff so that the information is understood by all? Right. Level 2, this is where the documentation comes into play. Do you have security plans? Are your processes documented, approved, and signed, and so on? And it escalates up. So level 3, they called it good cyber hygiene, but this is where you pick up an additional 45 controls, and there's 13 others that get added as well. So where you started off with 17 practices in one, by the time you're at level 3, you're at 130 plus different practices that you have to have. And ultimately, it's going to go up to 171 controls, I believe. Once you get up to level 5, I would consider that the equivalent of today's FISMA, Federal Information Security Management Act requirements, where you have a mature process of identifying the need for controls, developing, implementing, documenting, managing, repeat. You know, it's a continuous effort. It never stops. But that's what's required to have real-time security awareness as to what your environment is. And this is helpful whether you're doing it on your own or whether you're doing it on or behalf of the federal government. So it's highly recommended that everybody go to a level 5 from my perspective, okay? Right. Not because the assessments are more detailed, but because the accountability is, there's such a light that gets shown down on that, you know, that it's hard for people to outsource that. You can always outsource your responsibility. You cannot outsource accountability. And so that takes care of that problem.
For sure. I think just to go off piece a little bit, would it be fair to say, you know, in the real world, DoD contractors have, you know, budgets are finite. You know, getting to level 5 is likely to be more expensive than level 3. Is it fair to say that the majority of contractors will be looking at level 3?
Absolutely. Yeah, I would expect the major defense contractors to go to level 5, but for the most part, you're absolutely right. The greatest majority will not need anything beyond level 3.
I think I saw a number that said for level 5, there might be 20 or so, you know, top level contractors that would be looking at get into that level. Just to give an idea of scale.
But we're not going to publicize them here.
Okay. Okay, well, so what does determine the level then? I think that's a fair question, fair follow-on question.
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
So what determines the level? How do you know whether you need to be bothered about level 1 or level 5 as a contractor?
I'll punt that over to Leighton.
Okay. Number one, there's 2 ways that gets looked at. The first one is the DoD perspective, which is going to be, they're going to put the required level in the request for proposals that the contract organization who wins has to have upon award of the contract. And so they'll say level 3, they'll say level 1, they'll say level 4, whatever it might be, right in the RFP, in the request for proposal. That's a choice that is made by the program office. That's a choice made by the contracting officer. That's DoD's view. Right. And that's what will have to be there for each contract to actually get awarded to whomever is the winning party of the evaluation. The second view that is currently happening is DoD has projected that about 75% of their contracts, roughly, in that neighborhood, would be level 1 only. Then they said there would be another, about 15% that would be level 3. But what I have seen in the marketplace just over the last 6 months is that most all contractors are shooting for level 3 because that makes them eligible to be able to bid on contracts. Right. And so that's what they're looking at from that perspective. And we've seen in the marketplace and many companies that I've talked to over the last 4 or 5 months that are looking at it from, well, I can then be eligible, and so I want that.
Yeah,
can I just stop you at that point? So is it fair to say that eligibility is one thing, but actually the requirement is to be certified at point of award, not point of RFP release?
That is correct. It is at point of award, and they've made that very clear, and all of their information is that you need to be at the assigned level in the RFP at the point of award of the contract.
Bryan, I'm sorry, I cut across you then. Did you have something you wanted to jump in on?
Oh, I'm just conferring with what he said, that I've yet to have one client, I've talked to several of them, that want a level 1. Every one of them is asking for a level 3. So
right.
And it's one of those situations where it's better to have it and never use it that want to use it,
Right.
you have it.
Yeah,
Leighton,
because
do you
it's
see any contracts coming out that would be at a level 4, level 5, or are they all going to come out at a minimum level 3? So most people.
The
can
initial
contribute?
ones will all be level 3 because level 4 and level 5's online reference criteria is based upon a NIST document that's not final yet. And so when that happens, we'll see level 4 and level 5 come out. But at this point, which is 800-172, that's still in draft. It's still in final draft version. It's not official yet. And so you can't really set a criteria because there's still a possibility of some of those being reworded or changed.
Got it. Got it. Okay. So I think we've covered the levels. Any questions? Let me just check to see if we've got any questions about levels. No. Okay, let's get on to, let's pivot again ever so slightly into finding an assessor. How do you find someone? What's the process? You know, you see acronyms RPO and C3PA, 3PAO, and R2D2. I don't know. Let's do the Star Wars.
Yeah, right.
So, okay, so what's the engagement model? How do folks, they know they need CMMC to some level and they want a conversation about it. How do they engage?
So right now during the provisional assessment or during the provisional phase, everything goes through the CMMC AB board. So basically through Jeff and his team. So everybody who is currently bidding on a contract that has any of, or RFP that currently has a requirement in there for CMMC certification, they would need to contact the CMMC AB board, and they are currently reviewing and prioritizing. Just because there are not that many assessors yet, I think we don't even have completed C3PAOs just yet. So they're handling it at this point. Once all the verbiage on the DoD side is completed, and we have everything, the C3PAOs out there will be an official marketplace on the CMMC AB side or website where you can go and see who is all out there, who is a certified assessor, who is a C3PAO company, who is an RPO, who is an RP. So basically all the consultants, the companies, the certifiers, the assessors that have been or have gone through the training by the CMMC board, they will be listed there. So you can then reach out to them directly and engage them.
Okay, so putting myself in the position of somebody that needs these services, I heard RPO, I heard C3PAO, I heard RP, and I'm shaking my head thinking, what the hell is the difference between that lot? Who'd like to take that question?
I'll take it. All right,
right.
Let's start first and foremost. DoD only announced the first 7 contracts yesterday that require CMMC accreditation. Those are the first ones, and those were put out yesterday. All right. So that initial process to go through the initial efforts for the next 6-8 months is going to be focused on those before anybody else gets to it. All right. So that's the first thing to keep in mind.
What level did they come out at? What level did they come out at?
I haven't read them. I just know that they announced which ones yesterday. Okay. All right. I haven't gotten the RFPs to read them, but that's what they did. So, and most of those were pre-selected by DoD intentionally because of the information they have, because of what they cover, because of the contractual structures that need to be put in place. I mean, clearly there was a couple of them that are very, very big, and others that aren't, but you know, that type of thing. Second, there's 2 primary organizations to always keep in mind when you're looking for assistance in assessment efforts. You've got the RPOs, which are the consulting group to help everybody get ready. Okay. Right. And they all have potentially assessors assigned with them through either direct W-2 criteria or 1099 contract, and they will have registered practitioners who are versed in CMMC to assist the organizations to get ready. Then there's going to be the second part, which is the assessing organizations, which are called C3PAOs. There isn't any official C3PAO yet, at least not as of last night in our long-term discussion at the AB. There's nobody there yet. There are several organizations who are close, but there's nobody listed officially yet, all right, as part of those processes. So nobody can actually perform an official assessment until the C3PAOs are in place. And so that's where the provisional assessors that are on will be functioning and doing those as they come up as part of those processes. The CMMC AB is guiding that process. They put together an incredible background of support mechanisms to be able to do this. They are bringing in ISO standards around certification for organizations, certifications for individuals. They themselves have to go through a certification for being an accrediting body, etc. All of that to put it in standard practice. But the two organizations, the one other thing I do want to catch is that C3PAOs can also perform pre-assessment consulting, but the minute they do that, they cannot be the assessing organization at all. That's a total split. There's a conflict of interest clearly there. So it's one or the other from the C3PAO perspective. But RPOs can do the pre-assessment consulting. They cannot accredit.
Right. So it's a question of marking your own homework. You cannot mark your own homework. The CMMC AB marks the homework of the C3PAO once the assessment has concluded. So it's
that is correct.
I
mean, the C3PAOs report their findings to the AB, who then issues the certification to the contractor.
Right. So there's that extra check in there. So you know,
absolutely. And if there's any disputes or issues, you know, they don't like what they got or whatever, the CMMC AB has an entire dispute process in place.
Robert, can I ask about that?
Yes.
Yeah, so Leighton, I read about changes on the fact page from the DoD acquisition website that actually changed this AB as being the issuer to the C3PAO being the issuer, which was a surprise to me. Can you comment on that?
I'll defer that one to Jeff.
Jeff, we're so glad you're here.
Yeah, like I said, I'm just listening, but a couple of things. That is true. It's a residual effect of the ISO 1711 journey that we're on. So if you look at how ISO works, if you get an ISO 27001 accreditation, for instance, it's actually the registrar or what they call the certification body that gives you a certificate. Essentially, they hand it to you. That is true that by the time we are a 1711 organization, that will be the case for sure. The transitionary period, which is 24 months in duration, has yet to be planned out. And I'm actually going to be on the hook for that myself. So I'm working on it now. So I don't.
So what you're saying is this is the long-term plan that the AB is going to issue the certificate, but pending that ISO certification, we're going to have to come up with another accommodation.
Well, I'm reluctant to say, you know, it'll be 24 months and then all of a sudden we'll change. I think there's going to be a transitionary period. We are going to, it isn't clear yet exactly what transitions when or what's going to be immediate and what isn't. Sounds to me like the DoD put that on their websites. I hadn't heard that. So sounds like that's something they're very interested in doing, you know, pretty much right away. So I don't have a definite answer for that, but there's a whole slew of things that are going to be required of us and the C3PAOs because of ISO. That is one of them. So there are others as well.
So I would presume by that, I was also interested in how that was going to impact the arbitration process. To me, that seemed to be a pretty significant shift. But it sounds like maybe that needs to be planned out as we move from provisional assessments that really don't count to ones that we're holding people accountable.
Yeah, the ISO 17011 requirement, which is something we believe in and agreed to, wasn't, well, it was unclear until the contract was released that that was going to be part of our mission. So there were a number of things that we planned on that now have to transition. Now, like I said, it's a 24-month period. Some things will transition right away. Some won't be able, we won't be able to transition right away. I don't know exactly what those things are yet, but that is definitely one of them that will transition. I don't know when, or whether it's soon or later. We have a deliverable due at the end of this month to define all of that. So it's being worked right now.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, Vince. I think it's fair to say for those guys for those folks that joined to learn something and get some insight about CMMC, I hope this is delivering for you, because it is for me. I have a question in the chat just related to levels and assessments. So it's, we're not going completely off topic. So can a small company obtain a level 1 certification without going through a CMMC audit, we call it assessment, with a self-assessment? We currently don't have any contracts, but we want to be able to bid on contracts as a sub before getting into a long process to obtain our level 3 in the coming years. So we want to get to level 1 and we want to self-assess, I think is the question. I guess
self-assessment is exactly what CMMC is taking off the table, is self-assessment.
Right.
Okay. It has to be a third-party assessment process. Can they get this out third-party assessed at level 1? Yes, easily.
Yeah.
They just get onto the marketplace once it's up and running and has everybody there, negotiate with a C3PAO, and if they're ready, then have the assessment performed. All right. The point is self-assessment is being taken off the table for all new contracts. That's the other thing to understand about CMMC. It's only focused on new contracts starting 1 December this year. It's not focused on current efforts whatsoever. And so that's why there's this 5-year transition window, because most federal contracts from DoD are 5 years in length when you take all the options. And that's exactly why they did it that way. All right, is because of that timing, 1 + 4 or whatever they do in those efforts with their contractual obligations. And so this is only for new. This is only for, it's for all levels, but as we progress, the contract documentation, the request for proposals to determine the required level for the awardees of the contract. If an organization wants to get a level 1 so that they can bid on contracts in the future, there's no problem with doing that. It's part of the marketplace. It's designed around doing that, because we'll have both RPOs and C3PAOs on the marketplace. Assessors are individualized licensed in our efforts as part of our processes as well. C3PAOs are going to have to be 17020 qualified. The AV's got to be 17011 certified. Eventually, all the assessors are going to have to end up getting the 17024 certification, as the case may be. Some of us are already there because of other certifications we have, but that's eventually going to have to come into play as well as we go through all of this, so that there's a level of trustworthiness on what's being performed for them.
Great. So no self-assessment. It was William Eubank that raised that. He's raised a point. I don't know if it's a question, perhaps it's a discussion point. He spoke to William. Did you want to go with this, or do you want me to read it for you? It's up to you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Davies, and I appreciate you asking that first question. That was something that eluded us. We read, and my CTO was anxious to get a self-assessment done and completed and documented, and then start bidding on level 1 contracts. And I told him, based off of the DFARS and everything else, that was not something that we could shortcut. We still had to have an audit. But there was no parameters that we could find anywhere that indicated when that would be made available, except when I contacted the CMCC board, there was a conversation between myself and them, and they indicated to me that there were 15 companies going under evaluation period. And during that time frame, majority of the auditors that came out of the classes and are certified would be very focused on that effort. Until after that was assessed, there would be lessons learned that would come out of it, along with any type of mitigations and propagations that would potentially come out of those, that would then be provided to us. Until then, he did not expect any contracts to come out for quite a while, for even a level 1 for an RFP. So just the conversation that just happened about 3 or 4 that were just led is a little concerning, I guess.
Robert,
So-
can I jump on that?
Yeah, please do this.
Yeah, so William, I would say let's be sure to there's 2 different piles of things going on here. One is the self-assessment NIST 800-171. That's where that language is currently valid, right? And so if you're a company who has the appropriate 7012, 7019, 7020 clauses and has CUI, you are still required to submit a self-assessment to the federal government in order to get any new contract mod, etc. Right? So, and that's a, do you have it and do you have the clauses, right? So that's really very separate from the whole CMMC thing. And I just want to make sure that everybody was out there, because if you hear, oh, basic self-assessment, I don't have to do that. No. Not for NIST 800-171. That's a different rule. That's not CMMC. So don't all of a sudden drop track on that and then get surprised when you can't get your next contract award.
Okay, thank you. No, that's a great point, and I think that's where they actually led me to that, Mr. Scott. I agree with that 100%, but it was very confusing in the language based off of how it was presented. And again, with all the chatter about CMMC, of course, that's the thing on everyone's forefront.
Right. Yeah. Everybody's talking about CMMC, but the DoD added these 2 new rules for self-assessments against 7012 that we didn't really expect, I don't think, and that maybe some of the AB guys who had inside knowledge on this, but I was surprised when they came out with that requirement to turn your homework in. Now, I think there's a great debate in the community about whether or not turning your homework in is required if you just have the clause or if you have the clause and CUI. I have made the argument that's what the rules say, is you have to have the clause and CUI, and I get that, and I agree with everybody who says that. I personally see it as a risk, though, if you are bidding on contracts and you haven't turned your homework in and you've got stuff in the pipeline, and coming back and telling that contractor officer, hey, no, I don't have any CUI, so I don't have to turn my homework in. Give me my award. Good luck with that. I think if you're a small or medium-sized business, you are putting your future contracts at risk if you don't have your homework turned in. And that's not a risk I'm taking for my company. And that's not a risk I recommend anybody else take. You might be right. You may win the war and say, yes, I am right about this, but it's not a risk that I would take.
And it's also incumbent upon DCMA to make that determination on current contracts, because they're the ones who do the reviews for current. Is not CMMC, it's not CMMC AB. I mean, we've trained DCMA's assessors.
It's not going to be DCMA though, Leighton, that makes that decision. It's going to be the individual contracting officers who often are uneducated about this. They don't know what CUI is, and they're going to be making the decision and holding the contractors accountable.
And my whole point is, you still got to do the self-assessments, right?
Yeah, that's where I'm at too, and there are differing opinions about that, right? That are well held.
CMMC AB is CMMC's leader, and the rest have all said, don't stop doing self-assessments at this point, because that's still the rules right now. I mean, their phase in is 15 contracts, okay, as a pilot, They've always called it that. They call them the Pathfinder contracts. And that's what this is. That's the period we're in right now. That's what this first 7 of those 15 were what was announced yesterday. Okay. And so that basically sets the initial thrust into what CMMC is going to be over the next 4 or 5 years as it grows. And then eventually by the end of fiscal 2025.
I would
Yeah, go
also
ahead,
like to
Dasha.
say to that, NIST 800-171, that was a requirement or has been a requirement for the last few years. So no
Right.
company who has been doing business should have any issues at this point to do a simple self-assessment and upload it on the portal or email it to them. So I think that is really the minimum requirement that we should have. And to your point, Vince, same as your company, we're in the same boat as well. Is why risk it? The requirement was there for 800-171. Let's do the assessment, even if we don't have FCI CUI at this point. Let's just put it out there. It never hurts, or at least my opinion, it never hurts to have everything in place or be above what is required. That shows initiative. That shows it's your desire as a company and interest to actually protect information versus taking an assessment as a checkbox and just, yeah, I passed, all good. This is to what Jeff said earlier. This is not a checkbox exercise. This is not a audit. This is about improving, about protecting us, about protecting the government data, protecting your own company, protecting our nation. So I think this is where it's on all of us to really put time and effort into make a change and not just take the bare minimum out of what we have to do. That's just my
Can I jump in on this? So no, I fully agree with that. So and this is not a plug, okay? This is not a sales pitch, but as a company, one of our strap lines is being compliant doesn't make you secure. It's a mindset thing. You can check boxes all day long. It doesn't make you secure. But if your intent and your endeavor is to improve the security, then I think that's the way folks should be thinking. So with that in mind, and the fact that, this thing has started, ladies and gentlemen, like it or not, it has started. So, isn't it time to be thinking about these activities, about pre-assessments and getting maybe a second point of view to get you to that line in the sand that we all need to cross. Just putting that out there.
And also especially to what happened a couple of days ago with the latest, breach. I mean, nobody is safe. And what impact did it have, or does it have? We don't even know really at where we are. The investigations are still going on. Definitely, U.S. government was impacted very heavily. And where does it come from? A third party, suppliers. So basically us the ones that do business with the government. So let's, I think it's in all our interest to really follow the rules and make the best out of it.
Absolutely.
I view it pretty simple. If I'm doing the self-assessment, I'm showing that I have a maturity about my approach to cybersecurity.
Right.
And so if I show historically, since 171 went in 2016 or whatever it was, over the last 4 years, then I'm showing that I have a higher than initial level of maturity around my DFARS and my 171 requirements, whether they're for level 1 or level 3. And that's only going to advance the corporate level as well as what needs to be done, because you show that. I mean, as I'm notoriously talked about, I always focus on the MM of CMMC. It's a maturity model. Okay. And so the idea of that is you got to have the processes, you got to have obviously the practices and the controls, but you got to have the procedures, you got to have the policies, all those things that don't necessarily always show up in the discussion around can I get to level 1, or is it a 171? There's a different approach to plans. There's a different approach to all of that maturity in CMMC that advances what 171 puts in place.
Gotcha. Guys, I need to take a time check. We are over halfway and we've still got a hell of a lot of ground to cover, and I want to want to cover as much as we possibly can for our viewers. So the next question, the evolution of this, I think the next question is, okay, so how long does this take? I think, and I just want to say something at this point. On a previous webinar, we did say 6 months worth of evidence around processes and stuff. That's not true. So if we could just cover that point off in whoever would like to answer the question. So let's perhaps use CMMC level 3 as an example. Okay, I need that. What do I do? How long does this take? Where do I start?
So I'll give it a go. So yeah, initially I at least I was one of them who put out 6 months. It is a maturity level. So the whole point here is you cannot on the fly just create when you have an assessor come in, do the certification. If you create on the fly documents or do a vulnerability scan or show some kind of activities that are required for CMMC, but you haven't done that previously, that's not going to fly because that does not show the maturity element of what CMMC requires. Now, after clarification, I think there is still a little bit of gray areas here, but overall the guidance is it really depends a little bit on what area on the CMMC you're looking at. So for example, password changes, that's usually 60 or 90 days. Disaster recovery, it's an annual thing. So you cannot expect a disaster recovery test for an assessment to be done or have the evidence for the last 4 or 5 years. So it really depends a little bit on what it is that you're looking at. And it also depends on the assessor. Now we're all getting the same training. It's we all are professionals in the space. So yes, there's a little bit of a gray area, but if a company can show that they're really following it, and might it be the tabletop exercises for disaster recovery, or might it be the monitoring of alerts, then that will work. But you still need to have the evidence to show that you're really at the maturity level. And I'm sure there's Leighton or, Bryan, or maybe even Jeff, you can chime in on what your take on this is. Because I know we've been getting a lot of questions, and I know here in the chat as well, so it's an individual thing. Every assessor will interpret it different. So what's your take on this?
Yeah, I agree with you that it's going to be on the control, on the frequency of the control. If it's a yearly control, it's hard to gauge maturity. What I would do in that instance, I would look at, well, it's a new policy. Does everybody know it? Does everybody understand it? And I think from the interviews and stuff you get, that's part of the assessment. Part of the evidence that you'll gather is through interviews is to ask them, are you familiar with this policy? Can you tell me what it says? Are you following it type thing? If it's something that's brand new, they don't know anything about it. And that would go for policies that have been in place for a long time. They could have a policy that's been there for 6 months, and if nobody knows anything about it, to me, that's still immature. So it all depends on the main goal of the maturity is that everybody knows it, everybody follows it, and everybody sees it as that is consistently executed.
Okay, so back to the how long question then, not the pre-assessment part. Let's assume okay, you've done your pre-assessment and you're pretty confident that this is all gonna happen for you. You're gonna get your certification. You engage a C3PAO company to come and do that assessment with all of the right levels and everything that goes with that. Okay, the day one, the certified assessor arrives on site. What happens next? How long does that take?
Well, that's always a good question. How long is a piece of string? It really depends on the scope of your of the CMMC assessment. So if you,
just as an example, call it level 3. I think that's going to be the majority.
Well, it really depends. I mean, even level 3, you can have multiple offices throughout the US or even the world. CMMC itself has a requirement, or past COVID for sure, to visit offices. You have to be on site. That work cannot be done remote. So we have to consider that. If in case of big multiple offices throughout the US, there will be a sampling that can be done. I don't think we've got the exact number yet, as in 10%, 20%. what needs to be sampled, but you have to consider travel. You have to consider where is the scope of your CUI, FCI CUI data. And I think this is where a lot of companies right now are struggling with, is setting that scope, because the processes are not necessarily defined. So if you have a really defined and maybe segmented network and processes between your day-to-day commercial and regular operations versus where your FCI CUI data and processes and technology is, that could be very quick versus assessing the entire company. So the way I see it, recommendation is always try to make the scope smaller as possible. That will make the assessment short.
Right. Okay, so you're right. How long is a piece of string? It depends on what you've got, how many offices, where you're at, and lots of other moving parts. Okay, so I guess that would be a discussion point for if you were to take on a pre-assessment. Those are the sorts of conversations you could flush out with your pre-assessor. Okay, here's an interesting question. I know there's going to be a feeding frenzy on this one. I know, right? We've kind of answered it already, but I think we need to labour the point. Can I outsource my CMMC compliance to my managed service provider?
No.
No.
Point blank, no.
Absolutely not.
The accountability is still accountability is still accountability, and therefore the organization that is attempting to achieve the certification is required to manage that effort. Can they be supported by a managed service provider? Yes.
Right. Yes.
Can they? Okay, but the accountability part is still the contracting organization.
Right.
It goes back to what I was saying earlier. You know, you can always outsource responsibility for achieving a goal, but you cannot outsource accountability, because when there's a breach, and there will be a breach, you are the ones who are going to be called to account. Your MSSP, they may not even answer your phone.
Yeah, they'll be over the horizon at that point. Yeah.
And Robert,
Yes.
let me give an example of that. So say they're reaching a level 3 assessment and certification, and the company doesn't want to invest in a SIM to do log management. They can outsource a MSSP to do that for them and set the retainers to 6 months, 12 months, whatever they want, and have that MSSP do the log management piece for them.
Right. Okay.
But they still have to be responsible for the logs and delivering the logs and making sure all of that's happening.
And
For sure, that's a really good point. So you don't have to insource everything that you had previously given to your MSP. No, but you work with your MSP to make sure that those CMMC boxes are ticked, but you're ultimately accountable to make sure that they are. So.
And the MSSP or MSP also has to meet the security requirements on how they perform the work. They also have to have the maturity in place, especially if you put something in the cloud. You have to know, where is it located? Is it in the US? Is it being moved around the world? What kind of encryption is being placed? Is somebody monitoring that? So those security requirements that you should have to have in-house, you have to place the same, or you have to expect the same from your provider.
Right, that's a great point. Thank you, Dasha.
And
Okay,
just to kind of add on to this a little bit, this is an enabler for companies to be more responsive with their MSSP for whatever services they're providing. Instead of just saying, well, you know, company XYZ handles all of my security work, so I'm just going to dump this on them, and then you turn a blind eye. Now you have to be involved in the process, which is where you should have been at the beginning. But that's the difference between having a checkbox mentality, which is what auditors do, versus an assessment where you go in and you can look at something in a more holistic viewpoint, and you can see where you know, the practices are actually occurring, and that people can speak intelligently as to how their data is being handled, whether it's through an MSP or not.
Yeah, no, great point, Dave. Great point. Thank you. I wanted to raise a point about POAMs, because, you know, if you wanted to get your NIST, you could have a POAM to fix things at a future date and those types of things. So I see POAMs mentioned in the context of CMMC, and, you know, perhaps during the pre-assessment, it would be a good idea to have one and an SSP. Are POAMs, are kind of future fixes allowed in CMMC?
No,
Have at it.
Right.
No.
This is one of my
no,
favorite parts of CMMC.
yes.
If you compare it to, what was the downside? What is a downside to the overall FISMA perspective is that a lot of systems can get accredited on a POAM and a promise, and then they're off to the races and they're going into production. With CMMC, you cannot get certified at any level if you have POAMs. It's not about, a POAM is a great way to get there, but once you're going for that certification, have your act together. That's the beautiful part for CMMC. And hats off to the folks that made that decision. And I'm going to put some of that on Jeff, but that takes a lot of foresight, and guts to be able to make that call. And that is a tremendous benefit to CMMC.
I know from my background being a security control assessor for DoD over the last 10 years, as they attempted to put in RMF and FISMA criteria, that was always one of the biggest deficiencies that the senior management ran into, was the ability to say, I'm approved to run, but I got this hole over here, or I got that problem over there. CMMC and taking the lessons learned from those efforts following the NIST guidance under FISMA that they implemented starting in 2014 found that to be a major deficiency. So I think that they really looked at it, it's saying, which is what it says, is it's yes or no, you're there or you're not, instead of saying, I'm going to do it on a wing and a promise and a budget next year or the year after, that doesn't work for what we're looking at for maturity. Number one, it doesn't work. And number two, it doesn't work on whether or not they're secure right now. And what we're doing as we look at these as assessors is looking at both sides of that equation. Okay, so it's not just one side, it's both sides. And so we can't be saying, oh, they're going to do it in 18 months because that's when their budget comes out. No, that isn't going to fly, because they got to have both sides of the equation. We're looking at practices which are supported by our classic 171 control sets that are out there, but we're also looking at processes and maturity around those efforts, and do they answer the mail when something happens, and those types of things. And the minute you get into the POAM arena, that's not active, and that's what we don't want.
So Vince has got a sore arm because he's itching to jump in at this point.
Yeah, so I still have a POAM. And I think POAM is valid in two cases that I wanted to bring up, because I realize POAM bad. And what's really bad is, oh, I have this get out of jail free card that says I can plan to do this someday, and in 2050 I'll get to this, and then I bypass and I'm still compliant, right? I check that is bad. But I think there are POAMs in two senses. One, for people who are pursuing NIST 800-171 or have a NIST 800-171 compliance requirement, they still have to have them. So don't rip that up and throw it away. The second thing is, and I am updating my POAM for next year. My date was 15 December to be complete for my level 3 readiness, right? That was what we said our goal as a company. We are, after 15 December, we wanted to be ready to go for an auditor walk in the door. So of course I've got a couple things still left on that list that I'm going to get done before Christmas, hopefully, but we're darn close, right? But for next year, my POAM is going to be level 4. Right now, my main gig, my prime company, we see that as a competitive advantage, and we know there's not going to be very many companies need it, but we're going to put it on our glide slope. Maybe it'll take us a couple of years to get there, but we're going to start the process, and I'm going to have a POAM for that. And what I don't want is a CMMC inspector to come in and go, oh, you have a POAM, you must fail, and move on. I think there is a place for those to advance to the next level as a part of our maturity journey.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, as an assessor, when you look at a POAM, well, first I'll tell you, the biggest problem with POAMs is that eventually they become a business decision. So you've got people who are making, who are responsible for spending the money to remediate whatever is on that POAM. So they are likely to prioritize, and regardless of what the security requirement is, they're going to look at this from a business perspective. And, I think I can safely kick that can down the road. And that's the level of attentiveness that gets applied to it at that level. With CMMC and utilizing Vince's example of, I use a POAM to get to POAM to level 3, that's phenomenal. And as an assessor, if I come in to do Vince's assessment, and I'm going to say, great, Vince, you're level 3. You've got all your, practices and processes and controls in place, and I'm happy with your maturity model. And you say, oh, Dave, I've got a POAM for level 4. I don't care. I'm assessing you to level 3.
Right.
So I'm happy, that you've got one because that's a plan. And to me, a POAM is a plan. So that's the P. So, if you were just saying, I'm going to do this for level 4, well, that's a dream. Once you write it down, that's a plan, so you've got that plan, and that's great, but when I'm doing that level 3 assessment, I really don't care where you're going. I want to know where you are, where you've been, and how you're going to get there.
I think
Great.
a POAM is great to put next to a pre-assessment. So if eventually you're going to get to a level 3, and maybe you're not bidding this year, you're going to bid next year, 2022, and you have a year out. It's still good to do a pre-assessment now, so you know what you need to achieve. Create a POAM around the pre-assessment summary report that your assessor did. And then you can start making your milestones, like, by mid-year, like next year, I want to have a CMN, so I'm logging that data in time to have that maturity when I get to a real assessment.
Gotcha. Who knew POAMs would incite such passion in you guys? That's awesome. Time check. We've got 20 minutes to go. I'd like to go to Slido because folks have taken the time to raise some questions there, so I think it's fair that we ask them. The first one I had was, I'm the owner of a cyber consulting company, and by the way, if I read your question and you wanted to put your hand up and say, yeah, that was me, and chat about it, that's fine. I'm the owner of a cyber consulting company. If my company is an RPO with RPs advising our clients on how to reach CMMC level 3, does my organization as an RPO need to be certified at CMMC level 3? And I know you do for C3 PAOs, but I guess the question is, as an RPO, do I need a CMMC level 3 certification as a company to be able to perform RPO activities or pre-assessments with my clients?
If you retain CUI, yes. If you don't retain CUI, no.
All right, it's about the CUI. Okay, so over to Slido. Is there a consult, and these are in no particular order, I'm just going to read them from the top. So I tried to get a theme going and a flow going, but these are random. So is there a concise list of objective evidence needed to prove compliance with CMMC? One could go through the 400 pages of level 3 audit guidance, blah, 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 blah. So is there a concise list of objective evidence needed to prove compliance with CMMC level 3, I guess?
No, this is an assessment. This isn't an audit.
Right.
So it's up to the assessor to determine the appropriate level of objective evidence to show compliance with the process, the procedures, the capabilities, the practices. There's minimum, certainly, but that's a standard NIST view that you have at least 2, but there is no set number beyond that is a requirement for any level of assessment at any point. It's up to the assessor and their view.
Every company's different, and it's a conversation with your assessor. Okay. Next question. How is fundamental research being handled? Will there be an exception to CMMC for fundamental research, as in the DFARS 252, 204, 7000 clause for CUI? Fundamental research. did somebody finally stump our board?
No, I'm actually.
Are you frantically Googling?
Fundamental research still comes under the criteria around the federal contract information, number one, on where it's being done and what's being at what level. You know, whether they're doing fundamental research on quantum or they're doing fundamental research on some sort of risk model, it doesn't really matter. If it's in support of the contract, it will still have to meet the CUI requirements as defined by NARA. Okay, and that's who owns that areas. Is there? Yeah, sure. I mean, there's probably 150, if not 200 research agencies that have contracts with DoD. Absolutely. And then it becomes incumbent upon the contract officer and the program manager to determine what levels are required.
Fantastic answer. Thank you for that, sir. The next question, we see RPOs already, but no C3PAOs. When will they be active to start the actual assessing activities? Guess, Jeff, well, you kind of answered that one previously, but if you wanted to go again on that.
So the C3PAOs are starting to come up on the marketplace today. So somebody said earlier they weren't, but they actually are now. Not all of them, but a bunch of them.
Be on there? Probably not.
I don't know. I didn't look at the list. I mean, I just saw a listing. So so that means they've been cleared, and there's about 40 about to be cleared. So 20 are done, 20 are almost done. And they still have to go through a DCMA DIPCAC ML3 assessment before they can conduct an assessment.
Yeah.
So the DoD has that information. As soon as DCMA has done that piece and they've passed, then they can start doing assessments. That's the plan.
Awesome. Thank you for that. We had a couple of points about 6 months of maturity. I know we mentioned that previously. I think we've covered that off. Next question. The duration and evidence will depend on the assessor and which area within CMMC. Yeah, okay, we've covered that. So an assessor is free to determine if the evidence of maturity is sufficient. That seems rather arbitrary. I guess this was the conversation with Leighton and the evidence.
To what Leighton said earlier, it is a maturity. There's different evidence. Every company is different. So going in there and having that conversation of what exactly are you doing? I mean, we are all assessors. We have been in the industry until we have to ask questions to satisfy what we're looking for. Sometimes that can be a screenshot of something. Sometimes has to be a screenshot and multiple reports. Sometimes it will be interviewing on top of all that people. I mean, it's really different. Some companies have the evidence right then and there, and sometimes you have to dig for several weeks until you get all the bits and pieces of that puzzle together until it satisfies you that, yep, you are definitely, say, monitoring your logs and you can correlate if there's a potential threat or an incident or anything like that. So yes, it is a bit, well, it's not really arbitrary, but we all are in the industry. We know what we need to look for. So as long as we all work with the company that we're assessing, we should be able to get the same evidence that satisfies the CMMC requirements.
Yeah, and don't forget, ultimately, the CMMC AB are on the shoulders of the assessors to make sure they're doing the right things. So you kind of get in a twofer. It's not necessarily just the conversation you have, it is being checked. Okay, so, okay. Question for the provisional assessors. Okay, well, that's the panel. Will they be limited to performing assessments for the 10 Pathfinder contracts in 2021, or can non-Pathfinder assessments be performed?
I'd say if you're a C3PAO, you're working with and you don't have any company that wants to do an assessment can do assessment if they find a C3PAO that will do the work,
right? And
have assessors.
Okay, so again, this to me is a question about getting ahead of things. You know, we see the bow wave, we see what's coming, we see the numbers. And we understand that actually it's not an overnight activity to get your certification. So I guess the advice is, start now, depending on what your
Now,
intention is.
do remember also on assessments, there are 3-year limitation timing on it too. So if you get an assessment, say a year before you get a contract, you're going to have to get another one in the middle of the contract, because they are for 3-year limitation on each of them. So, this rollout process is 5 years long, which means the companies who go through the first 2 years are going to have to get it redone before the end of their contract anyway.
Leighton,
So
you are the gift that keeps on giving. You just keep popping these nuggets out there. Fantastic. Okay. I think that was it with the Slido. I think we've got kind of a couple of minutes to run. What I wanted to do at this point was go through my personal kind of things to know about CMMC, the key points, and then open it up to the panel to add theirs. Okay, so in no particular order, I'm pretty sure we've covered all of these. You cannot self-certify. CMMC is not a checklist assessment. CMMC deals in evidenced maturity and ensuring a culture of security. And actually, we haven't used the C word on this call, culture. This is about your company's security culture. It will take some time to gather the required evidence of cybersecurity practice. Gaps in your posture or maturity cannot be compensated with a poem. And I know we had some laughs with that one. Your cybersecurity practices may need to be revised on multiple levels to certify. CMMC is binary, no pass, no DoD contract. CMMC is cumulative. To pass level 3, you also need to have passed levels 1 and 2. And just to cover, this is coming. The first contracts are out. It feels like it's incumbent to at least start having conversations about what next, because I think there are, Jeff, you'll confirm this, there are now 75 certified provisional assessors, is that correct?
There's actually 100 provisional assessors right now that are just waiting to get their background checks done.
Right. So you've got at least 4 or 5 of those on this call. So don't, I guess that my advice would be, there will be a supply demand question coming. I know CNMC are heading that off with their phased approach.
We know.
we know.
If you wanted to get ahead of it, then just make a start. So that's what I had, and I know there were other nuggets around the room. So if guys, if you wanted to add anything, let's go around the panel. So Leighton, you're always good for soundbite or two.
Okay. Keep in mind that this is a progressive view. And so because it's a progressive view, your evidence not only has to be reflective of what you've done right now and where you're at, but what you've done to get there. Okay. And it's up to the assessor to determine the amount of time necessary to show that. There's no set, it must be 6 months, or it must be 3 months, or it must be 12 months. No, the point is, as a maturity model evaluation, you work your way from level 1 to level 2, and then you work your way from level 2 to level 3, understanding those requirements at level 1 are still applying at a level 3. So in the CMMC world, we start off with 6 areas at level 1. In level 3, we have 17. Therefore, all 17 have to meet the same that the 6 did at level 1. All right, it's a cumulative viewpoint. All right, so for example, we got in level 2 policies. There's 15 areas that got to have policies. Well, when you move to level 3, we got 2 more areas. They got to have policies too, not just the plans that level 3 requires, but the policies that level 2 requires. All right, so that's that cumulative effect. And I don't think I can emphasize enough that it's a binary yes, no at time of award. All right. POAMs on CMMC items specific to CMMC accreditation that you've met the criteria are not allowed.
Fantastic. Thank you, sir.
Business wise, absolutely. Other things, no problem. But
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
when it relates to those areas.
That's clear. Thank you, sir. Bryan Johnson, did you have any kind of summary words that you wanted to share?
Yeah, my summary would be, and this is the thing that I'm seeing the most, is that the CMMC is such a change, a cultural change when it comes to the audit world. I mean, in the past, we talked about with this, with POAMs and everything like that, that before that, basically you do an assessment and you had time to clean up those things, so to speak. This basically takes the goalposts and moves it to the moon when it comes to assessments into audit. So this is, I think, the most awakening thing that I've seen, and also the most conversations I've seen from clients is over this one specific topic, that it's pass or fail. So, and that scares them to death. That's the thing that scares them to death is, how much preparation do I need to do to ensure that when we pull the trigger on having the assessor come in, that I'm going to pass it, because they could do pre-assessments all day long, but as we all know, IT is a moving target as far as controls go. So you could be 100% compliant today, and tomorrow you don't pass, and now you spent that money for nothing. So that's what I'm hearing with all the chatter, so to speak. That's the thing that's
For sure. I think the DoD intent was to frighten the life out of people because they're sick of seeing replicas of their hardware being produced by countries other than the US. We've all seen the photos, right? Dave Fairburn, concluding remarks, sir.
Yeah, couple of things. One, understanding that CMMC and the work that they've done from the board level all the way down to those who have been doing the training on this. This is not a paperwork exercise. This is not getting ready for an audit. This is an ability for all companies to embrace the culture of cybersecurity in a way that will help them in the long run, both in getting contracts, but in keeping contracts, and in, having that degree of confidence that they can not only protect CUI as is required, but they can protect their own internal information, both PII, their own internal proprietary information and so on, in a way that is going to actually manifest itself in showing insecurity. So, it's embrace it as something that will help you to get better. It's kind of like, eat your Brussels sprouts. They taste terrible, but good things happen. I'd hate to, as much as Jeff would love to have, that Brussels sprout,
I love Brussels sprouts, Dave.
Thanks, Jeff. So, eat your Brussels sprouts, man.
Dave, it's a great point. We haven't discussed the kind of, this could be a differentiator for your business.
It is. It's a huge differentiator.
Doesn't have to be all medicine. There's some sweetness there. Thanks, Dave.
You bet.
Okay, I'm going to go with Dasha. Did you have any closing remarks? And Jeff, you're here. I'm going to come to you as our exalted CMMC AB guest. I'm going to hit you last, but I wonder if Dasha had a few final closing remarks.
I think this has been great. Yes, CMMC, I'm excited that it is happening. It really will make a difference in the companies. It is cultural. It will require a lot of cultural change. It will require everybody to come on board. And I think that's great. That's really great progress. One tip for all companies out there that are considering getting CMMC certified and getting a pre-assessment done, please start thinking about your scope. Start thinking about where you are, where do you currently have your CUI, who all accesses it, how is it technologically segmented out, or if you don't currently have but want to get into that business or know you're going to bid on contract, start thinking about it, how, where, what, who will actually have access to that FCI CUI data, and try to limit the scope. That's going to make it a lot easier for the assessors. That's going to make it a lot easier for you as a company to maintain that environment. And it's also going to be cheaper in the long run.
Yeah, cheaper in the long run is fair comment. Thank you, Dasha. All right, Jeff, over to you. I have one question for you. I know the AB is very particular about what you can and can't say about this stuff. So first up, please tell me we didn't cross any lines.
I always push the envelope on that, but I think I'm good.
Okay. What did we miss, Jeff?
Well, this has been I actually came to listen to these folks talk because they're the experts in the industry. I mean, their experience with cyber and helping clients improve performance is the best in the industry. That's how they got into the program. So I actually came to learn. I'm not a cyber expert like Dasha is or Leighton is, not to that extent. So it's really gratifying to hear that there's other people out here talking about CMMC with intelligence. And, there's so many things going on social media with people giving webinars that don't know what they're talking about. And some people that should know better talking about certain things, but it was really nice to hear, such an esteemed group speak with such intelligence about the CMMC. And also, frankly, just selfishly of me, the assessment method, which was my work. So it's really exciting to hear you all talk about that. You're actually going to go do this thing. And it makes me realize that, the thousands of hours we've put into this as volunteers has really starting to pay off. I mean, things are really starting to roll now, and it's super exciting. So I had a blast listening to all your talk. I do want to leave you with two little messaging things that would really help for all of you to talk about in the market. And I simplify it this way. CMMC isn't hard. Protecting national security is hard. And you should be doing that regardless of CMMC. Right. You see a lot on social media saying CMMC is going to be this massive burden for my company. And the answer is no, it's not. Protecting your data and networks from adversaries is going to be a massive effort on all our parts.
It's the right thing to do, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah. And Dasha said it. I mean, this is about protecting our assets against adversaries. And, CMMC is just a baseline. It's not hard. What's hard is protecting national security, which you all should have been doing, not you all, but we all should have been doing it already, right? Yeah. And I think we've all learned that lesson the hard way this week. The second thing, messaging wise, that I think would be really great is CMMC is not expensive. You're hearing a lot of talk about, oh, it's going to be $100,000, it's going to be $50,000, it's going to be $3,000, whatever the number is, it doesn't make any difference because what's expensive is protecting national security. What's expensive is protecting our networks and our data. If we're not doing it today, and we're just letting anybody in our networks, yes, it's going to be expensive to protect national security. That has nothing to do with CMMC. Now, the CMMC assessment, yeah, there's cost to it because there's people of your caliber delivering them, and there's cost to that, and that's okay. It's a market thing. But the cost is high if you're not protecting national security, and that's really how we have to think about it. This argument about it's going to be way too costly or way too little, it's irrelevant. What's important is what's it going to cost to protect national security. So those are just two things that I hope everyone can kind of get behind.
For sure. Thank you. My absolute pleasure having you. Prevention is cheaper than cure, for sure. So that just leaves me to sincerely thank everyone on our panel, to sincerely thank everyone that joined in. I guess the video will be available on YouTube. We'll put that out there. Yeah, just be safe, everyone, because this virus is still kicking ass. I know we've got some folks on here that are recovering. Just be safe, be healthy. Happy holidays. I think 2021 that we're going to see a lot of pent up demand being released into the market. It's going to be a busy year. So wish everyone well. Let's say hope you have a fantastic bit of a break over the holiday period, and thanks again for joining. We truly appreciate it. It's been a pleasure hosting this.
Thank you so much, everyone. Really appreciate it. Enjoyed it, and all the best. Happy holidays if we don't talk or see you before that.